This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the April 11th edition of the DRF Players Podcast, show number 228. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, tripping on my words, bobbling at the start like a favored runner in the Bluegrass Stakes there. It happens. Joined today from the planet Texas by podcast co-host Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
What is going on?
I heard you did some traveling this weekend. It sounded like the caravan made its way from Memphis to Hot Springs and then ended up in its customary parking spot in the green room. Is that right?
It did. It found its way. It was a lot of fun. We had a great time. I know Nick and I got to talk about it a little bit on Friday. I had a great time in Memphis at Rhodes College as a guest of Dr. Marshall Graham, and then, Hot Springs was great. I broke my maiden at Oaklawn Park. Had a little bit of an unfortunate story there. But
do tell. We could have a little. We'll get into. There's a lot of meat on the bone today, obviously, but it wouldn't be the DRF Players Podcast without a good tangent. What happened to you?
I was just jacking around. I was getting ready for tournaments on Saturday, just kind of soaking in Oaklawn. I wasn't fully prepared. For people that watch the Oaklawn feed, they have like the little 10% show bonus on track. So I was like, I'll just hang around, have a few drinks, and just play a show parlay.
Wait a second. You're telling me Mr. Heavy Hitter himself, Mr. Cold Pick 3, is all of a sudden there at Oaklawn Park, and you became a show bettor? Come on, JK. You're disappointing your fans.
They were having like an AARP convention, and I just felt like that's what I needed to do to fit in. So I play a little show parlay, have some success, run it up a little bit, and the machine kicked out my voucher in 2 vouchers. I thought it was going to come in one. They can only put
a certain amount on one voucher sometimes, and they'll divide them up. That's a dirty little trick that happens, yeah.
I walked away, realized that when I came back 20 minutes later and talked to the tote people, they were really helpful. They called, they found my ticket. I told them the machine, and some person who I hope got a stomach ache when they got home cashed my ticket. So,
and not a surprise.
A little annoying, but
1 to 9 on that one.
But we did hear fellow DRF guys, Jake and Jody were at Keeneland this weekend, and I saw on Twitter that Jody left a voucher in the machine for like maybe a couple $100, and the guy waited at the machine holding the ticket until he came back.
That is straight from heaven right there. That is just fantastic karma. And wouldn't it be great if for the rest of their gambling careers, the Keeneland Good Samaritan won every photo, and your pal at Oaklawn got DQ'd on a regular basis and basically never had another bit of racing luck again? Wouldn't it be nice if that's the way the world worked, Jonathan?
Oh, I want the guy. I don't even want him winning photos. I don't want him coming down. I just want him running dead last every time. I want his 1 to 9 shots to be off the board.
Fantastic. Well, that's disappointing. A little bit of human nature playing in there. I don't want that to be the only statement you make about your time at Oaklawn. I assume other than that, Mr. Kinchin, how did you like the track? Oh, did I lose you here, Jonathan? It's a little harder on a one-runner show to fill time. This has happened in the past where I've had to fill time when one guest or another falls off, but it's usually easier because I can ask a question of the other guest. It's a little harder when you got one guest and they're not there anymore. Jonathan, are you back? All right, while we wait for Jonathan to finally make his way back on the show, I'll make a confession to everybody. It really annoyed me just then when Jonathan made me laugh a couple of times because I'm playing hurt today. I don't know where this came from, but I've got some like weird lower back stuff going on. And like every sneeze, every cough, every laugh hurts. But I'm going to play through it, and I'm going to get not only through the rest of this show, I'm also going to make sure to make it to Oaklawn myself this weekend. Family and I leaving tomorrow night, heading out to Memphis. Also going to hopefully get a chance to meet up with Dr. Graham and sample some of that city's famous barbecue. I've been scouting the zoo, which looks like it has some entertaining daytime activities. If my wife lets me / doesn't notice, Perrin and I may sneak across the river to check out some greyhound racing at some point, but it's going to be fun, and I don't want any little thing like a terrible back to get in the way. It was looking a little dodgy this morning, but I've decided I'm going to give it a go. And speaking of giving it a go, Jonathan, are you there? You are not there. This could be a soliloquy. This could be reviewing Derby prep races and why don't I just go to some questions while we wait for Jonathan? We've also just had a volunteer of a special guest to join in the show. I may have to take him up on that. I won't reveal that just yet. I'll work on adding a guest, and I'm going to, meanwhile, get into some of the fantastic questions that we had asked of us this weekend. The first one is about why there was no connected pick 3 between this weekend's 3 big races. Of course, we had, and we'll be getting into them in great detail in a moment, the Santa Anita Derby, we had the Bluegrass Stakes and the Wood Memorial. Why was there no connected pick 3? And I think the answer, racing is very hard for different entities to work together. At sometimes they do, and you get something like this. Typically, like you'll find a sponsor who might come in and be able to put it together where we have a big day. They used to call it actually this very day. I remember it being one of the first bets I ever. Not first bets I ever made exactly, but first bets I ever took seriously once I got into handicapping was the Big 3 Pick 3 in 1997. And I remember that Pulpit in the Bluegrass Stakes was my single. And I remember there, and a friend of mine, my great friend Scott Capolo, who's one of the guys who I went to the track with a lot in the late 90s. We used to hang out at this room in Aqueduct called the Man of War Room. And he would remind me of this route from time to time when we were rooting in our single Pulpit in the Big 3 Pick 3 that year, ridden by Shane Sellers. And apparently my route was simply, ask him, Shane, ask him. Anyway, so that came up for a long time. But in terms of putting these bets together year after year, it's hard to get these entities to work together. If you wanted to try to do what you could as a fan to facilitate such a thing, I would say just give feedback to the individual tracks. I don't know which profession at the track it would be. Perhaps a mutual manager, somebody like Jim Goodman at Keeneland could probably on the Keeneland website find his info, mention that you're a fan of these type of bets, ask if there's anything that could be done to get things going in that direction. You also might consider talking to our friends at the NTRA. I mean, they're sort of the closest thing we have to a representative body. They've done a lot of good work on behalf of horse players. Of course, we've talked at length on the show about the tax issues and the great work that they've done to try to get those antiquated tax codes revised. I would make a comment over to our friends at the NTRA and see, hey, is there anything that a fan could do to encourage tracks for this kind of cooperation? Because that would have been really fun to have be part of the story. Let's also go to another question about betting a long shot on a tight budget, and the question was what are the best ways to do that? Here's my thing about betting a long shot on a tight budget. And I had a friend, I don't even know what he's talking about. This is a friend you might know from my column last year. I wrote my sort of end of Saratoga column, and it was the guy in the column. He's known as the Ice Cream Man. I didn't want to give away his identity, and this story might make you realize why I didn't want to give away his identity. He does some crazy things. Apparently, he tipped to multiple people Green Grotto in the Carter. Green Grotto in the Carter performance we'll be getting to a little bit later on in the show. So he tipped Green Grotto. He liked Green Grotto. Somehow doesn't manage to cash for $1 in the race. Now, I have zero idea how this is possible because two things. One, and this gets back to the original question about betting on a long shot on a tight budget. You bet to win. If you like Green Grotto, you have some amount of money, $5, $10, whatever it is, and you bet it on the nose. You don't complicate it. Now, what makes the Green Grotto situation even weirder is even if you were just playing exactas, I don't understand the thought process of, I love Green Grotto, I don't really like Unified, so I'm going to leave Unified out of the exacta. Like, that to me is nuts. If you really don't like Unified there, all the more reason why you at least bet win place on Green Grotto at 7 million to 1. Or, I mean, to me, any basic handicapping of the race, don't you have to at least use Unified defensively? I'd like to think what you do there, if you like Green Grotto, is have, whatever your regular exacta amount is, and then 5x that exact amount to cover the possibilities with Unified, because he's going to be tilting the tote board so badly. So that's my thought on that. We're gonna add somebody to the call here if this works. I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna see if it. I'm not sure if I can do it. We might need to do it from the video administration end, or I might be able to just add a person. We'll see in a minute. Did that work?
Can anybody hear me?
You're there.
Beautiful.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is in one of the great last-second game-saving. I'm trying to think of the right sports metaphor. I would want to have said Andy Chavez in the 2006 NLCS jumping over the wall to save the game, but of course the Mets blew it anyway. Anyway, this is the podcast equivalent, the original host of the DRF Players podcast. Joining us now, Matt Bernier. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It sounded like there were some technical issues, and this has become my Tuesday. I don't even want to call it a guilty pleasure. My Tuesday morning sort of get going on my day off. I listened to you guys, and it sounded like there was some issues. So I figured, you know what? If you needed a lifeline, I'll throw it out there.
I love it.
There's a chance
God.
I'm back.
Back from the dead. What's going on?
What really happened? I didn't want to say this, but Pete and I did this on purpose because Matt's busy, and we figured if we could somehow make him feel sorry for us, that he would join us today. Sucked him in. Now I really have no idea what happened. I just my computer went left on me, but we're back.
Idea. Well, now that we have all three of us here, I've been speaking very slowly and attempting to give out some decent info and get to some of the questions for later. And I feel like I answered them at least halfway decently. Let's start reviewing these races from the weekend. And let's start out west. Let's start with the Santa Anita Derby. It was won by Gormley. The buyer speed figure was 88. Matt Bernier, of all the handicappers I know, I think I've probably heard you over the course of his career say the most nice things about Gormley. Was it satisfying to watch him win? Were you on his side on Saturday?
It was nice to see him get back to one of, I don't want to say one of his better performances, but to his winning ways. Having said that, I think the race was a dumpster fire from top to bottom. I hate to be so, kind of crass about it, but it's just hard for me to get excited about anything coming out of that race. I suppose Battle of Midway ran just fine, but if you believe that, don't you kind of have to say Royal Mo ran equally as well, considering he was hung out to dry the entire way? And going into it, I didn't think very highly of him. So Gormley, nice that he got back to the winner's circle. Mike Jones to go and bet him in the Derby at 10, 12, 15 to 1 off of an 88 buyer, not particularly.
It was definitely a fast, slow race shape. So if you wanted to build a case, you could talk about how quick the pace was early. He did attack that pace to some degree. It seemed like just a beautiful job of riding by Victor Espinoza. There was an interesting thing. I was hopping around through all the different coverage available, and it seemed like pre-race there had been a disagreement between Victor and Sheriffs about how the horse wanted to be ridden. Victor saying, "Oh no, this horse wants to go forward." Sheriff saying, no, you got to rate this horse. And in a funny way, watching the race, it seemed like it turned out they were both right. The horse definitely wanted. If the horse had his own way, he would have been more forward. Victor did a great job getting the job done. Jonathan, what do you think we can expect from here from Gormley?
I'm kind of with Matt. I don't really want him moving forward out of a slow race where it felt like he kind of had a fairly good trip with three horses dueling in front of him. And two of those horses stuck around. So it doesn't. Two horses that didn't get people, particularly excited leading into it. I think one of the biggest questions that I want to know is what the heck happened to American Anthem? Like what
Let's talk about American Anthem for a minute. Because remember, you guys, I'm getting fairly into the weeds here, but I think people might be interested in this. remember the track on the American Anthem Gormley Day? It was a wet track, and like it was a really weird day from a biased point of view. Like it seemed like I should have done some homework. Oh well, but it was like half that day. It seemed like it was closers, and then the last 3 races were all wire to wire. I'm just wondering in the back of my mind, Jonathan, if maybe there really was something weird with the track that day, and that explains how American Anthem looked that day versus the 2 non-efforts since. Do you think, am I overcomplicating it, or might there be something here?
Well, the problem is that Gormley's overcomplicating it, right? Because he ran so well that day, then ran so poorly. Then everyone was like, oh, that race was bad because American Anthem and Gormley ran bad. Now Gormley comes back and wins the Grade 1. So he's the one who's complicating the evaluation of American Anthem. And obviously American Anthem's not doing himself any favors by continuing to get his doors blown off.
Yeah, Gormley, I mean, I think if you're just looking at it from strictly a speed figure point of view, we're trying to think how much of a regression really was it. I feel like the effort that stands out the most still is that race 3 back, and I feel like he's kind of run something close to the same race twice, and then gotten and the difference this time was maybe dynamics. I mean, Matt, back again as the Gormley expert, I'll throw it back to you and ask you, who is the real Gormley?
I guess, it's interesting that you brought up the sham and American Anthem and what the heck has happened to that horse, because when we did the weekend wrap yesterday, I kind of talked about it. I almost feel like Gormley, I kind of think he's just running the exact same race each and every time. The difference is occasionally he's facing horses that are inferior to him. And when he faces better horses, he's getting his doors blown off. I mean, his past 3 races, he's run 94, 90, 88 buyers. He's not getting any better from a speed figure standpoint. I just happen to think maybe he's taken advantage of a pretty subpar group that ran the Santa Anita Derby. I mean, look, that's part of the reason you got 13 that went forward Saturday afternoon. I kind of think Gormley is what he is. I think he's a nice horse. Again, I love him. I think he's really good. And I still maintain, I think ultimately he's a turf horse. I don't think he's a dirt horse. But I don't think I think he just runs the same race. And sometimes good enough, sometimes not.
All right, let's move on from there. It doesn't sound like we have any strong betting fancies at the moment anyway, coming out of the Santa Anita Derby, looking ahead to the first Saturday in May. Let's move to Keeneland. This is a race, you used the phrase dumpster fire before, Matt. In terms of my visual impression of watching each of these races, like not even looking at the clock, just what my eyes are telling me, at first glance, I think I might have applied that same image to the Bluegrass. Subsequently, looking at speed figures, they've come back a bit faster than I would have guessed, especially the Timeform US speed figure, very strong for ERAP in the Bluegrass. The buyer came in at 93. Even that feels high to me. What did you think, JK, when they crossed the wire? You were lucky enough to be there. What did you think we were looking at?
Oh, what did I think when they crossed the wire? I think, damn, I hope I used IRAP on my 3rd entry in this Keeneland tournament.
And in fact, you did, you lucky duck.
Yeah. No, that was a complete stab fest. I just wanted to make sure that something crazy didn't happen. I was shocked. I was shocked because Practical Joke, who I was completely against, ran well, and I would have bet Tommy Massis $4,000 exacta box on Taprit and McCracken if I was playing in the BCBC at that time. I was completely floored by those results. So it's tricky. I don't understand why Taprit was so far back, but I also cannot believe he ran so poorly. And I can't believe how those horses were getting away from McCracken in the stretch. It was a very, very mind-boggling race for me.
Let's start with the winner. I want your impression of the winner. It was game, but if you didn't know any better, and you see this horse hanging on his wrong lead coming down the stretch, and horses who look like they're supposed to pass him and they don't, doesn't it look more like something you'd find in a maiden race than a theoretical major Kentucky Derby prep?
Yeah, I feel like this race is going to be the toughest one to truly, I don't want to say truly analyze. Ultimately, everyone's going to have their own opinion of it, but I feel like this is going to be a polarizing race because going into it, everyone said this was the strongest prep to date where you didn't have a lot of quantity, but you had a lot of quality. And coming out of it, Oh, it's terrible because IRAP won. I agree. Visually, IRAP looked like he was ready to fall down. He never changed leads till after the wire. And Practical Joke, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people feel the way I do. I don't think he wants to go this far. And the fact that he ran as well as he did, I'm going to give him some bonus points. But I still look at it and say you're supposed to go by IRAP. When I watched it live, I had the same reaction you did, Pete. But then going back and watching the replay 4 and 5 different times, I'm actually quite interested in McCracken coming out of it because he was very eager early on. He was much closer to the pace than he has been going into the far turn. If you go back and watch, I think Joel Rosario, it was a perfect piece of race riding where that sort of middle move that Practical Joke made, I think that was just as much to pin McCracken in as it was to get Practical Joke into the race. And McCracken got shuffled back to last, and he did come on a little bit. He flattened down the lane, but considering it was his first start in 2 months, first start after a little bit of a hiccup, I think he takes a step forward. Ian Wilkes' quote on Sunday morning, he talked to Carl Nafsker and said, we can't kick the Bluegrass sort of jinx.
Explain what he means there. That's a great quote.
You go back, Unbridled lost this race. He went on to win the Derby. Street Sense lost this race, went on to win the Derby. McCracken, we'll find out. But of the whole lot, McCracken is the one that I would be most interested coming out.
I love that case. And you said so much good stuff in there, and it just reminds me to give a plug. Anybody who's interested in spending an hour of their Tuesday listening to a racing podcast should also be watching all the videos that Matt and Mike Beer and Dan Illman do on DRF.com. A few points in there, Matt, that I want to pick up on. I think that's very interesting what you said. I didn't notice about ERAP changing after the wire. Do we think – I mean, to me, I can't help but think of it as a negative. This is not a horse in his first or second start. But is there a world in which you can take the lack of a lead change as any kind of a positive and say, okay, well, this is a horse who's still figuring it out. Maybe it's a reason to improve. Or I tend to look at it as strictly a negative of by the time they get this far, they're supposed to know what they're doing. I want one who knows what he's doing. But is there a way to look at that almost as a reason for ERAP to do better?
Man, I think if you're trying to spin it in a positive light and say, this is a horse that'll be 30-1 in the Kentucky Derby, and maybe he'll figure things out, or maybe there's a forward move, I suppose you can spin that. I'm with you. I mean, after 8 starts, if you still don't know what you're doing, I just don't think you're going to know what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's different if you're like a trainer who's famous for taking them slowly and letting them figure it out. A McGahee horse can be as goofy as they want to be in their first dirt start at Saratoga. I'm almost more interested in how they're running at and after the wire, but that's a maiden race for 2-year-old at Saratoga. This is a major prep race for the Kentucky Derby. I think it's tricky. I like those points you made about McCracken, Matt. I get it. Like what one could say, and as I thought again when in my original super negative reckoning of the race, that it was a hang job. I mean, this horse had license to be short. Missing the time, as much as they tried to downplay it before the race, in retrospect, it sort of gives an excuse for two things you saw from McCracken in the race. The keenness early, which you'll often see of a horse who's been sort of kept in the barn a little bit more than they might want to have been, and also the shortness late. I mean, I just wish the figure was higher. If I were to take the Timeform US figure and accept it as gospel, I could really start to make you a case about McCracken coming back, especially if he's forgotten. JK, I kind of want you to rain on the McCracken parade because I do think there's a negative way of looking at this. But what's your honest opinion? Where do you go with McCracken from here as a handicapper?
The problem I'm having is I'm fine with the narrative, right? I'm fine with the missing time, Ian Wilkes, Carl Nafsker, I'm fine with that. The problem that I have is that the two horses that he was closing into, or maybe the lack of closing into, is my problem. Like Matt said, and other people that I agree with, their opinions quite often feel like he's going to excel more at a shorter distance with Practical Joke. And IRAP, I mean, he was like, what? He was 6-1 in the Sunland Derby and was up the track. He ran in the Mind That Bird, for crying out loud. And we're talking about a horse that was possibly, we're comparing him in a race to a horse that was on track to be our Derby favorite. That's the part that hurts my story for hurts the narrative for McCracken, is what he was chasing and the lack. I mean, he's supposed to make up ground on those horses regardless, and so That's the part. That's the negative spin for me is the winner and the second place runners in the race.
Let's play a game. I don't have the prices in front of me, but right now, McCracken 12-1 for the Kentucky Derby. We'll start with you, Matt. Buy or sell?
Oh boy, at 12,
Yeah.
I would have to strongly consider that, just because, there's really not much else that I'm super thrilled with. So I mean, 12 on a horse that. And the other thing too, and I mean, I don't want to go away from this game that you brought up, but I'm curious to hear what both of you have to say about the racetrack at Keeneland on Saturday. I think that's
my next question. Actually, that was my next question for JK. It was a little bit weird. So, Jonathan, answer that McCracken question, and then we'll move on to the racetrack.
Yeah, I think so, because I would take the 12-1 because I'm okay with the story. It's at that price. If he works really well leading up to it, I think he could be a sneaky buzz horse because the narrative is so good, right. And people will buy into the narrative. And the other problem is where else do you want to go? I mean, I'm telling you right now, and I reserve the right to change my mind, obviously, but I'm either going to pick McCracken or I'm going to pick Always Dreaming. It's almost a determined, it's almost over. These other horses, I don't want any interest. I don't have no interest in.
Now that seems extremely harsh on a horse who I'm a little excited about, who we'll get to in a minute. But before we do that, let's talk about the racetrack on Saturday at Keeneland. I had one shrewd handicapper whose opinion I trust implicitly say that he thought in the routes specifically that speed was a little advantageous. I saw another, actually, and it was you, JK, who mentioned you thought that it seemed like you wanted to be outside. What do you think, Jonathan, given the peculiarity or any peculiarity in the track, does that amplify your reactions at all to the results of the Bluegrass Stakes?
Yeah, if you want to say that it was a little bit better to be outside, there was no real significant trip that you want to bet out of the Bluegrass. I mean, the It's Your Nickel, I think, was the horse that was on the inside the entire time, and I wouldn't bet him in a maiden race. So, I don't think that there's anything that you're going to be like, ooh, yes, there's that excuse because the track did this. I didn't really see that trip in the Bluegrass.
I'll turn it back on you, Matt. What was your thought on it?
I thought speed did relatively well, which, really for the majority of the day, and whomever you spoke to about the routes, I even thought in the one-turn races, and that's probably why I'm blown away by Awesome Slew's effort, but that's another story for another time. That's kind of the reason I'm as sort of intrigued with McCracken as I am. If you believe it was a little bit tilted towards speed, and he got the shuffle on the far turn back to last, and he still did come with a move, and he flattened out down the lane. Again, maybe I'm just trying to make a case for this horse now, but I think just in general, Keeneland and Saturday, I thought were a little bit speed friendly.
JK, the term that you used is so perfect because more than any other race, it comes into play in the Kentucky Derby, the narrative. There are certain horses that just will get picked up on, especially, again, tied to workouts. I suppose there's a world in which McCracken is going to be a heck of a lot shorter than that 12-1. That was sort of just the price that popped in my head. I mean, I feel like coming off that figure with the interrupted preparation, I'm not going to be super excited in single-digit territory. So I was almost throwing it out there as wishful thinking. But we'll have to see, and we'll have some real numbers that our podcast listeners in the UK and Ireland can even bet on in the upcoming weeks before the Kentucky Derby, and we'll do a little bit more of that, playing that game for real. But let's move things east to the racetrack nearest to the place where I sit at the moment in the Brooklyn bunker, the Wood Memorial, and it was won by Irish Warcry, who, if you held a line over that last race in the PP, would look like one of the strong Derby favorites of the last few years. With that ugly blemish in there, it seems like a lot of people still have questions about him. And one of those people is very clearly Jonathan Kinchin. What's your problem with Irish Warcry?
Well, I don't have a problem with him. He did get me a $3,000 grade 1 gamble seat, so I don't have a problem with him.
You're such an ingrate. The horse wins you 3 times, and you come out here and crab his form?
No, I mean, I get it. Okay, so he ran bad at Gulfstream because of what? He didn't like the
Nobody
track?
seems to know. I mean, Graham Motion, as I said on the show last week, it was like he was playing trainer excuse Mad Libs when he discussed the race. Insert trainer excuse here, and some of them would be bounce. He even said cuppy track. I mean, he didn't know. I mean, I guess. I mean, if you were to, horses, not machines, animals. Maybe he slipped on a hot dog wrapper. Who knows? It's one of those things that I don't think we'll ever have an adequate answer to. But I mean, what's more important? You know what I mean? If you're looking at 5 things and 4 of them are all the same, do you worry about the 4 that are the same, or do you worry about the one that's not? I don't know the answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the thing for me is if he's got a problem with a certain way that a track is playing, cuppy. I've heard that word a few times at Churchill Downs. I want to see how he's going to get over the ground. Now, Graham showed his hand before in Kentucky Derbies, and he showed it with Animal Kingdom, having, one of those, that kind of wow workout moments like Barbaro had, like American Pharaoh had, like Rachel had. If he happens to have that, then I'll change my tune.
Gotcha.
People that listen to the show know that how much stock I put into workouts, at least into my evaluation, not into my decision making, but into my evaluation. So that's if he works his tail off and everything's going well, then he could be upgraded for me.
But what about the start on Saturday? You haven't said anything about the performance on Saturday. I just thought visually it was impressive. It was rock solid on the clock. A 101 Beyer speed figure, Timeform US equivalent, much lower than that. Timeform US had it more like a 94. Visually, to me, the impression was more of the 101. It sounds like you weren't like, and he was clearly. It just seemed to me he shaped like a horse who had something left at the end. But so that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah, no, I think he ran well. I mean, I don't think he really had what you would say would be a tough trip. I thought he kind of had everything his own way, and he ran well, and it's good for him for kind of proving his form from South Florida. Wasn't an aberration, at least a good performance. And so, but I guess I wanted Cloud Computing to run a little bit better to make me feel better about Irish Warcry. Battalion Runner didn't really pick up his feet.
That's a little harsh.
I didn't think Battalion Runner ran as well as some might have thought he was when he was the Buzz Pletcher horse for majority of this year.
Yeah, he didn't run as well as Always Dreaming. Pick up his feet, to me, that's, Taprit didn't pick up his feet.
That's fair.
What do you think, Matt? Let's get you involved in this discussion. Jonathan seems just underwhelmed by the Wood as a race, is how I'd characterize his remarks. What did you think of the race in general?
The worst thing for me Saturday between both Keeneland and Aqueduct, where you had wonky tracks. I mean, they were, whether you think they were severely altered one way or the other, or there was a little bit of a change. I mean, I feel like you would be hard pressed to find anyone that said they were both honest tracks that you could win from anywhere with any kind of trip. I thought Irish Warcry was good. I thought he rebounded to what we had seen at Gulfstream 2 back. And I know Motion has said that, doesn't really know what the excuse was. Maybe I'm being way too kind, but you go back and look at the chart for the Fountain of Youth. The horses at the half-mile pole that were 2, 3, and 4 ran 7, 8, and 9, and the only horse that stuck around, and I say stuck around, he was still beaten by over 6 lengths with 3 rules. I think the pace, it doesn't look like it was fast fractionally, 47 for a half mile. I just think the pace was a heck of a lot hotter than anyone really cares to admit it was. And if you think that, and he just got caught up in a duel, draw a line through it, and all of a sudden you're sitting on this. Now, he got a candy trip Saturday afternoon, and I don't know that he's going to get such a trip in Churchill and in Louisville, but I have no knocks against this horse. If you draw a line through the Fountain of Youth, all you're left with is a perfect 4 for 4. And, to me now it's going to be fascinating to see really what happens Saturday. If Classic Empire does what he's supposed to do, I think he's going to be the favorite. If he doesn't, I don't know who the favorite's going to be. Is it Always Dreaming? Is it Irish Warcry? Is it McCracken? I guess, long story short, roundabout way, I thought it was a very fine effort. I had no problem with it.
I like the point you made about the pace in the race where he didn't do well. Here's one thing I'll say. In that race, he definitely ran a lot faster early than he ever had before. And sometimes you'll see that at Timeform US, and the pace figures are good for this, to sort of look at the way a horse develops. Now, he's supposed to finish more than he finished no matter what. So that, to me, it is if he had run on and just been like a little subpar, I'd have been all about that excuse. But it is something to look at, and it's not a bad point at all. Battalion Runner ends up second. Cloud Computing, who JK mentioned, third. I'm assuming now Cloud Computing technically has enough points to go on to the Kentucky Derby, but I'm kind of feeling this as a horse who's not at that level right now and would be well served to sort of rest up and make a run at some of these summer 3-year-old races. What do you think is going to happen with Cloud Computing? I bring him up just because he's a horse we talked about after his maiden on the show, just because JK and I were so impressed with it. Where does he go from here, Jonathan?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the interesting dynamic there is what they're going to do with Practical Joke, right? The same ownership, I believe. And so do they want to put both of them in the gate and have 2 runners and 2 shots, or do they want to try to be conservative and pop one in so you can have a runner and then save one for later? So we'll see. If it was me, I guess I would run Practical Joke in the Derby and then keep Cloud Computing for a, maybe run him at the Woody Stevens or something, or the Pat Day Mile, and then work him back up to possibly the Preakness or save him for the summer. I don't know. It's tricky because, they both have negatives, right? Practical Joke, in my opinion, wants to go a little bit shorter. And then Cloud Computing is a lightly raced horse that you don't want to ruin by throwing him into the fire of the Kentucky Derby. I think he's ultimately the more talented of the two. But it's a tough decision. I'm glad I don't have to. Well, I wish I did have to make it, honestly.
Exactly. I wish I were in the position to make the decision. I don't want the responsibility of making the decision, because it's one of those things we all agree about Practical Joke. Probably not wanting to go that far. But if you're an owner, if you're in this game, depending on how much most people, it's Kentucky Derby or bust kind of deal. The pressure I'd put on myself to take a shot would be immense. But I mean, that having said that, I don't think in my mind there's any question that both of these horses would be better served if we're just talking about the horse, not talking about me and the reason I'm in racing and all that. We're just talking about the horse. It might be both better served in other spots. What do you think, Matt Bernier? Where do you think we'll see Cloud Computing and Practical Joke next?
Practical Joke, I'm going to be surprised if he's not in the Derby. I don't personally think he should go. I think, like you say, we're all in agreement, he probably needs shorter, but he really, you want to talk about the horse bringing you there. He's danced every dance. He shows up. He's hit the board a couple different times. I have no problem with them saying, you know what, why not? In a year like this, let's go on with it. If I were Klarovich and company, I would put Cloud Computing away, bring him back at Saratoga, because I think he's more talented than Practical Joke just on pure ability. I would put him away. He's had a lot of racing in a short amount of time. And I know that sounds crazy because he's only started 3 times, but you've crammed a lot in a short period.
Oh, yeah.
I'd put him away. I would wrap him up and get him ready to go and point toward a race like the Travers.
That would be a very, very interesting. If there were a Travers future book, I might think about taking a shot there. You mentioned before about the racetrack, Matt. I meant to pick up on that. Definitely seemed to me like the Aqueduct was speed favoring. Is that part of the reason, JK, why you were so harsh about Battalion Runner, who ends up running second in a Grade 2?
Yeah, no, I think that probably has a lot to do with it. Also, the type of player I am, I'm a pick 4 player. I'm not too interested in who runs second all the time. So I think sometimes I give him a hard time for efforts behind. But no, I do think the inside was good. So that performance would be downgraded in my mind, regardless.
And could you upgrade Irish Warcry in theory from that for being 3 wide on a speed track, or do you feel like he was near enough and or did enough real running when he made the top that you don't feel that way?
No, I think that you could give him a slight upgrade for that performance based on that. The only problem is that you don't want to upgrade him too much because he kind of did get the little kind of the dream trip. He was a little bit 3 wide early, but for the most part, he just kind of got to sit off of that and go. So
I wonder if he isn't one of these horses though who's capable. He's won on the lead. If he's just not one of these horses who's capable of providing his own dream trip, at least to some degree. Obviously, nobody can really do that in the Derby with its 20 horses. But I don't want to be one of these horse players who sometimes get so negative about perfect trips. There are certain horses who are more, I think this is indubitable, but people don't always talk this way. There are some horses who are a lot more likely to get perfect trips than others. For me, I would put Irish War Cry in that. I'm at least thinking about him a little bit that way after that performance. So it's going to be fun. We're going to see what happens. We're going to be following all the news of the Triple Crown Trail on this podcast. You can follow along with Matt's coverage at DRF.com as well. And it's going to be a fun few weeks to see what's going on with these colts. But for a second now, I want to talk about the fillies. And we're going to start off with a game of good stat, bad stat, something I picked up on Twitter, this stat. And I'll just give it to you guys and we'll play the game. Good stat, bad stat. Bob Baffert adding blinkers, graded stakes. 0 for his last 13 after Abel Tasman doesn't get it done on Saturday. Matt Bernier, we'll start with you. Is that a stat you think it's kind of a joke, this game? It's not like there's one answer, good stat, bad stat. But what are your thoughts on that stat?
No, I buy into those sort of things. I probably buy into the numbers a little bit more than I know other people, particularly in the office, do. But it's similar to Pletcher when he puts blinkers on going into a graded stakes race. He's something like 1 for 25. It's just not a move that these guys do very frequently. And I think there's a reason they don't do it frequently because it's not very successful. Having said that, I'm not going to preclude Abel Tasman from running better in the Kentucky Oaks, but boy, we'll get to it. I have something to say about the filly and the Santa Anita Oaks.
Oh, we'll throw it right back to you after we get JK's thoughts on that number. Now, Jonathan, you're the one on this very show who did question if maybe Abel Tasman and her running style weren't necessarily suited like a hand to a glove to Bob Baffert's methods of training. Do you think is that part of what's going on here? And what do you think of that stat in general?
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to give him another shot with her to see just kind of if he can figure her out. You know, it's a tough thing to try to do, to take a horse off of someone. But that kind of goes to my second point. I think it's a bad stat. I think some people get a little carried away with their use at times and how they use formulator. I think you have to start with a question and then try to answer that question through formulator. And to me, in that scenario, it's irrelevant and it's wrong. That stat tells a story of Baffert having a horse in his care, running the horse his or her entire life without blinkers or running them without blinkers, and then switching to blinkers in a graded stake. That's what that story is. It's completely different when he gets the horse for the first time and then puts blinkers on the horse. Like, he never made the decision to not run the horse in blinkers. It's the first time he's having the horse, and so to me, it's irrelevant.
All right, let's move on to the winner of the Santa Anita Oaks. Matt, it sounds like you might have a bold statement for us.
Yeah, I said it yesterday in the office, and I'm sure you guys will laugh and think I'm a nut. I think she's better than Unique Bella.
Wow, Paradise Woods.
I made an offer to one of the guys in the office. I said, I'll give you the field for the Oaks and give me her. I get
crazy.
I get she was out there by herself. I understand it wasn't the most challenging of leads. She buried that field. She finished in something like 31. I get that, she's going to need to overcome a little bit more adversity. But if you go back and watch those first two starts, there's something here. Mandela's quotes afterward, there's a reason that we nominated her to the Triple Crown, not suggesting she's going to run in any of those races, but they clearly liked her. To me, that was the best 3-year-old performance, maybe with the exception of Mastery thus far.
What do you think of that, JK? Unique Bella, Paradise Woods. Who's impressed you more to this point?
Well, I was trying to figure out where Matt came into some money at when he first said I made an offer. I thought he made an offer to buy the filly. I was like, I don't know if you can afford her, Matt. No, I think she ran huge. Impressive indeed. Too bad, we don't get to see the Paradise Woods Unique Bella showdown, but hopefully later in the summer we will. When horses run gaudy numbers like this, when there's a lot of other 2-turn races of quality horses on the same day, it definitely should catch your attention. That race wasn't far enough apart, and that track at Santa Anita is not one that I think has been known for changing significantly throughout a day. And for her to run the number she ran was very, very impressive. And yeah, I get it. She was loose, but when you're 10 clear at the top, and then you stay 10 clear, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, 107 was the buyer speed figure. Timeform US had it lower, a 124, which rates more like a 101 buyer on my little way of messing around with that. But I mean, it is Santa Anita, which is very kind of speed. It'll be interesting to see if that can be replicated on a surface like Churchill Downs. It's going to be jaw dropping. I see where you're coming from, Matt. Unique Bella had impressed me enough and under enough different circumstances that I'd still, if you made me answer that question, I'd still lean that way. But I don't think you're nuts. I mean, you're. What do you think about Matt's bet there? The evens versus the field, Paradise Woods. I think he'll get low. I don't think she'll be even money in the race. But does that sound crazy to you, JK, or is that in the ballpark?
I get it. I think it's a little crazy. I think you can get better than even on the day. Don't you think?
You have to.
I never suggested I was throwing out even money, but I said, you're going to have to work on the odds. But
okay. I see. Okay, now I'm following you a little bit more.
Give me one.
Gotcha. One against the field with odds. What odds would you want right now?
I got to be honest. I mean, if you said that when they went into the gate on Friday of Oaks Day and she was 2-1, I mean, I would take that in a heartbeat. I don't know that she's going to be that high. I mean, this 107 is going to jump off the page. She's probably going to be, depending on who else shows. I mean, this is assuming all the other big girls show up. If Abel Tasman and Farrell and, all those like Miss Sky Warrior, I think she's probably going to be 7 or 8 to 5. But if you gave me 2, I mean, for me, I'm already thinking ahead. If you, depending on what the rest of the sequences look like to me, like she is, anyway, again, I could be way overblowing this and just getting caught up in the moment. I mean, she's a single for me in everything.
Shout out to all the smart people that have the mutual field at 8-1 or 9-1 in the final Kentucky Oaks pool.
For sure.
Nice. Isn't our sometime pod listener and friend Jack Jenkins one of the people who has some interesting futures on the Oaks side, or am I thinking of somebody else?
No, I think Dan Kovalevsky.
Oh, Danny.
I don't think he has that freak that ran on Saturday.
Well, let's talk Abel Tasman for a minute. I think, thinking about the big picture of what the goals are and how different the racing surfaces can be from Santa Anita to Churchill, and if at least some of Paradise Woods' effort was being that alone on a track that wasn't unkind to. I mean, I think you can make some excuses for Abel Tasman in terms of a reason she might turn the tables. Obviously, Matt doesn't want to be hearing that. But what about you, JK? What do you think? Are you interested in Abel Tasman next time, possibly under different circumstances that might be more favorable to a closer?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you think about the scenario, how it'll be different, they'll be going a little bit longer. Baffert will have another, 4 weeks with her, 3-4 weeks with her, whatever the time is at this point. She'll likely have something challenging her, more quality challenging. Paradise Woods will likely have something more quality challenging her early. There's a lot of reasons that you could maybe look that Abel Tasman can turn the corner. I think an important event that happened this weekend that's also kind of makes Paradise Woods such a standout at this point is how poorly Elate ran. I know a lot of people were excited about her possibilities moving forward, going a mile and an eighth with a patient trainer like Bill Mott. So, I guess I could see Abel Tasman having an opportunity to turn the tables, but it wouldn't be something I'd be cutting in line to bet on.
I love that expression. Matt, are you anti-Abel Tasman? Is it more just how impressed you are with Paradise Woods?
Yeah, no, it's not at all am I anti-Abel Tasman, and I don't think if you like her going into the Santa Anita Oaks, you should be getting off. I don't think she ran poorly. I mean, look, she was two and change clear of It Tis Well, who's a graded stakes winner in her own right. She just happened to run into a freak. My big thing is, even with the other pace that looks like it'll be signed on, and sure, maybe Paradise Woods isn't as good sitting off him, and a horse like Miss Sky Warrior, I've never loved her, but it's hard for me to knock a horse that just goes out and wins every time. I just have a hard time seeing the fact, even if, let's just say, I know this is too elementary of a way of looking at it, but I mean, can Abel Tasman make up 12 lengths? Even with, I know there's going to be different dynamics, and let's say it's going to be less than that, but I mean, are they going to flip that much over the next 5 weeks? Where is one going to back up? I say 5 weeks, it's 3 weeks? Is one going to back up that much and the other one going to excel that much? I don't think it's going to happen, but like I said, I'm not anti-Abel Tasman by any stretch. I just think Paradise Woods is a freak.
I think when you look at it in terms of form, that does sound like a hard thing to achieve. But I would suggest that the racetrack alone could be half of that distance of the 12, and then all of a sudden it comes into hand. But it's going to be fun. We'll see it all play out. I want to talk about two more races from the weekend. I feel bad we're giving short shrift to some big races we won't even get to at all. Two other things I want to talk about quickly, one of which seems relatively minor, but I was impressed on the tape, and JK had brought it up compared to all the graded stakes action. And then we do have a couple questions I want to get to. We got about 10 minutes left on the show, but I don't want things to go too far without talking about the Carter. We mentioned it was a speed favoring track, and I do believe that's true, and I do believe that helped Green Grotto. But what a story, getting it done at 53-1 under the type of good aggressive speed ride we're too often lamenting when riders don't go on with it and really put the other horses in the race on the stretch the way that Chris DiCarlo did there. I bet Tommy Macho. I should be bitter about it, but how bitter can I be when I see Gaston Grant in the Aqueduct Winner's Circle winning a Grade 1, a UPS driver who moonlights as a trainer? So cool. What did you think of the race, JK?
Oh, I mean, I think that Andy Serling looks like a genius from always being on Twitter talking about why people don't run in the Carter more often and why they're scared to get a Grade 1. I think this is probably a prime example as to that point. So good for him. It's obviously we kind of talked about the inside, or the speed being good, and I think that he was kind of helped in that regard, but he ran well and he got a Grade 1 and great. It's great for the connections. I love hearing stories like that.
Matt, Unified, hang job or victim of the racetrack?
I think I'm going to lean a little bit more, and I don't want to put words in Jonathan's mouth, but I tend to believe Aqueduct was a little bit more inside than necessarily speed on Saturday.
Fair.
And I think that's kind of what carried Green Grotto along. Having said that, Unified, if you are what everyone has kind of made you out to be, you got to go by. You have to go by Green Grotto. We love Green Grotto. He's a nice old hard hitter, but I mean, nobody's mistaking him for a superstar. And I'm curious. I wonder, that was Castellano's first time, I believe, riding Unified. If Jose was still aboard, does Jose allow Green Grotto to get to the front that easily, or does he push the issue a little bit more? Again, it's just kind of throwing that out there. But all things considered, fun story, good story for Green Grotto and the connections, and anybody else that had him at 50+1.
Oh, yeah, I told the story when we were struggling before about my friend. You remember the Ice Cream Man, JK from Saratoga, my buddy the Ice Cream Man?
I don't remember.
You might not remember that's his name. I think I'll tell you off air. But he had texted me that he had tipped to a friend Green Grotto at 50-1 and somehow managed in his own betting not to cash. Anyway, you can hear me yap. If you go back and listen to the pod version, you can hear me tell the whole story. Very sad scenes. Can't leave that race without talking about Tommy Macho. I'm extremely of the belief that he would have won the race with a clean journey through. JK, I'll ask you the tough question on that one. Was that bad luck or was that rider error?
It was a kind of a tight spot he was trying to get down into, but
it was.
Yeah, I'll never knock a jock for trying to go into a tight spot. I'd rather them do that at times in a close finish like that rather than trying to circle around horses and steady out of there. So I agree with you. I think that he was sitting. He was running. I needed Unified too. Not to surprise anyone that I was on the chalk, but no, I think he probably would have got up, and I don't want to blame the rider. I think that it's just an unlucky situation.
Do you concur with that, Matt?
Yeah, I think just a little bit, circumstances, a little unlucky that he couldn't quite get through. Having said that, I don't like, no disrespect to the connections or anything. I've just never liked Tommy Macho, and he still doesn't like to change leads, and he's just the kind of horse off a running line like this with that spot of trouble that wherever he shows up next, I mean, I have no problem trying to beat him at a short number.
International bad trip horse going to the Westchester and Met Mile, I'm guessing, but we'll have to see what connections decide to do. The one that we were going to, the sort of throw-in race I wanted to mention, JK had highlighted it to me, is from Keeneland on Sunday, race 4, where Yoshida, 3-year-old turfer, got the job done. The Beyer speed figure was 83, but there was something very impressive about the race visually, especially the fact that the thing galloped out to Cincinnati. JK, what are your impressions of this horse?
I thought she ran huge. I mean, on debut, coming off of that long break, first time, a 3-year-old for Bill Mott, and we all know Bill Mott's reputation for what he does with horses early. He's not cranking on them like some of the other guys do, and I just thought it was super impressive. The fractions going 9 furlongs, and I think she's going to be a special filly that's going to win a lot of big races. Like you said, the gallop out was like bizarre how she kept going. Like they weren't.
Are you sure? Sorry to interrupt you, JK. I thought it was a he. She's a she. Are you sure about that?
He, sorry. Yeah, I don't know why I was saying she.
Okay.
Yoshida. I don't. Yeah, it's a he. It's a he.
I was going a little. I thought I was going mental there, but yeah, there was a lot of class there. It'll be interesting to see. There are a lot of races for 3-year-old colts. Limited to American turf. We have that listener who loves to hear our thoughts on the Derby and Derby and Oaks undercards well in advance. Maybe that's a horse to keep an eye on for that. All right, let's do a couple questions before we have to get out of here today. We're going to start with this one, and I'll ask you, Matt Bernier, how far in advance do you finalize your vertical and horizontal plays on a racing day?
Honestly, as early as I possibly can. Because at that point, I don't want to be trying to scramble at the last second, getting things in, which as much as I don't want to be, I still fall into that. Unfortunately, I know I'm bad about that kind of thing. But the earlier you can get everything kind of mapped out, the better. And if you have to make adjustments going forward, whether it's scratches or track changes or anything like that, I think the earlier you can do it, the better. So for me on a normal day, if they draw a Wednesday for a Saturday, probably sometime Thursday night, maybe early on Friday, and then adjust from there.
Now, your answer is more complicated, I realize. And I realize this is how I should have introduced you when you came on to save our butts today. TV's Matt Bernier, not just Matt Bernier, TV's Matt Bernier. You're often running around working on these big race days. So for you, that's all the more imperative. Perhaps JK, as somebody who's able to make decisions later, not running around quite as much on some race days, do you do it as early as Matt does, or do you leave things a bit later looking for a little more of that real-time information?
Yeah, no, I'm not. I mean, I've gotten to be better at being a tote board watcher, so I don't really necessarily need to see the board to kind of finalize my decisions. And playing pick 4s and pick 5s, you're always betting. You're not always, but you're betting into blind situations a lot where you don't even know what's going to happen when you place your wager. So, I try to bring my computer wherever I go. However, on Derby day, on a big day like that, my pick 4, pick 5 ticket maker situation has been put in, screenshotted, and texted to myself, and I just have it on my phone. So, no, I'd like to have I don't like to wait till 4 minutes to post, 3 minutes to post, 2 minutes to post. I prefer to get it in a little bit earlier, but circumstances don't always allow that.
This is a point I'll make about this, and it's not original. It's stolen from Mike Maloney, who says that not enough horse players pay attention to the difference between the time when the final changes come out, before and after when the final changes come out. And he feels like you have sort of a special opportunity to gain a little extra edge after those changes are made, going back, doing your final analysis of pace scenarios, etc. And really, that's for him is when he tries to hone in a little bit more on exactly what the bets will be. And I've been attempting to follow that a little bit more. Not always possible in a busy life, but it's something it's the kind of thing that probably separates a pro player from the rest of us, and something that I thought was worth passing along. We're going to button it up with one question here. We have two good ones. One we'll save for next time, and one we'll hit here. I'll do this one. What do we all think of the discrepancy between the general impression that this is a subpar 3-year-old crop of males and the very strong numbers that many of these horses have earned on the Timeform US speed figures? Matt Bernier, we'll start with you.
I've said in the past, I don't think this is a weak group. I think at this point, this is a strong group. The problem is, not all of them want to go this far. Practical Joke, I think, is the prime example, or a horse like Favorable Outcome, who we haven't heard from in a little while. I think there's a ton of ability. I just don't think that they're all true sort of Triple Crown candidates, and that shouldn't sort of knock the overall quality or the narrative of this entire group. Just because they may or may not want to go 1.125 miles or 1.25 miles doesn't mean that they're all bums. I think this is a good group. Whether they, the majority turn into middle distance horses, I don't think that all of a sudden, makes this group subpar. I think it's fine right now.
JK, what do you think of that one?
Well, I think it's an unfair thing to say when two of them are sidelined. Three of them, well, 2.5. We'll see what happens with Classic Empire, but losing Mastery, losing Not This Time. I think that's a little bit tough. And I think the figures don't lie. The numbers are coming back at least good enough, but I don't think you can answer that question until like after the Travers is run.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was more. It wasn't like some declarative statement that it's a bad crop, so much as there is a general impression out there. If you surveyed Horsey Twitter and were looking for clues if this was a good crop or not, the answer would be no. I think that's where it was coming from. It was like the sort of narrative versus the numbers, at least when it comes to time form. I've got to go with my general impressions that it's not some overly strong year in the sense, and for me, this is why that matters. In a year where I feel like the top contenders are really strong is a year where I'm more willing to accept 3-1, 5-2 on American Pharoah in the Derby. When I think there's more parity between the group as a whole, and maybe they're not the strongest generation we've seen, that's when I start trying to want to get creative and put my ceiling of horse price I want to key around much higher, up more like 8-1, 6-1, something like that. So that's my thought on that. It's my anecdote. I understand the numbers don't lie, but sometimes, as we say all the time, they're a guideline, and you at the end of the day, you got to look what's in your horse player's gut and make decisions from there. That's all the time we have, gentlemen. I want to thank Jonathan Kinchin. I really want to do a cartwheel, and I think there's going to be a bottle of Jack Daniels heading your way in the near future, Matt Bernier, for this bailout job that you did today. I really, really appreciate it. Most of all, even more than Matt Bernier, I want to thank all of the listeners for tuning in, sending in your great questions. Hit us up at podcast@drf.com. We will be back on Friday. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.